Hello and welcome to my show Indus Cuisine, and I'm your chef Basim. We're back with a new episode from the heart of Pakistan. Today's recipe is very interesting, and this recipe is one of the most famous and one of the most loved recipes of Pakistan. This recipe can be found in a 5-star restaurant or a hotel, or it can also be found on a roadside food stall where everyone can go and eat it for as less as $1 a plate. So we're making dal mash fry. What does this basically mean? Dal means lentil, mash is the form of dal we're using, and fry means we're going to fry this dal towards the end. So this dal likely to be found in its perfect version in the region of KPK known as Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. This is the Pathan region of Pakistan where mash ki dal, which is actually called in Urdu language, is very famous over there, and it's basically a meal that every Pathan would love to have any time of the day. This recipe has originated from that area, and it has traveled through Landi Kotal with the recipe of chicken kadai. As everyone knows that I've told you about chicken kadai, it originated from there. It was a recipe which was made in a wok made out of tempered steel. This was the recipe which we're making today, which was made in the same wok, but it was a vegan. It was a vegetarian recipe from back in those days. Yes, back in those days there was no concept of being vegan, but people used to love lentil a lot. So this was something that people used to have if they were trying to avoid beef or mutton or lamb. Why? Because that could at times be a little heavy on your system. So what are the ingredients for today's recipe? They're very easy. You can easily find them in any superstore or a general store around you. You need some fresh coriander and fresh mint leaves. This is done. Then you need some onion, some tomatoes, and you need mash dal. You have to go and tell them what mash dal is. Why? Because it's a different form of dal, it's a different form of lentil. Why? Because whenever you get lentil in the market, there are 4 or 5 different types of lentils and their textures vary. For this recipe, you need this form of lentil precisely. Why? The reason behind that is that this lentil, if it's boiled even more than 15 or 20 minutes, it doesn't lose its shape. The texture is tough and the flavor is different from all the other lentils. Then you need some butter and clarified butter. You've heard it right, we'll be using clarified butter and the normal butter also. Then you need some ginger, you need some garlic, you need some red chili dried. These ones if you can find. If you can't find these ones, you can use the Thai red chilies which are dried also. You need some green chilies fresh, you need some garam masala, cumin seeds, black peppercorn, you need some cumin powder, you need salt to taste, and this is all what you'll be needing for today's recipe. So the first part of this recipe is you need to boil the dal. Remember, when I say fry, it doesn't mean that I'm going to start frying the lentil. It means that the lentil must be boiled first, and once it's properly boiled, then I shall fry it. The other thing about this lentil is, if the other lentils you were cooking, for example moong, you could always put it in water or soak it in water for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. With this dal, you must soak it for at least an hour, and if you have time, take it up to 2 to 3 hours. Why? Because you need to get it soft before boiling it. So firstly, we'll be requiring a wok. We'll add the wok over here and we'll increase the heat to full. You need to add water in it, and once the water comes to boil, then you will be adding the lentils. The water goes in. And I'll give it a lid. So once it comes to boil, we'll add the lentil in it. So what I usually do for this is I try increasing the flavor for this recipe. So what I add is I add a little bit of ginger and a piece of garlic while I'm boiling the lentil. So always remember, whenever you're adding some ginger, you must cut it in a way that you can always pick it out towards the end. Same goes with the garlic. I'll take the root out and I'll throw it on the side, and I'll just slice it in half. I'll add both of these ingredients to the water. Why? Because it will flavor the water. When the water will be flavored, the lentils will be flavored. You need to add around half a teaspoon of salt for this recipe. Remember this. and let it boil. Once it comes to boil, we'll add all the other things. Okay, on the other hand, this recipe must be cooked with onions, and the onions must be brown when you cook them. So what we'll do is we'll pick up a pan, we'll keep it over here, and we'll increase the heat. Bring the heat to full, but not so much that it exits the pan's surroundings. Why? Because you don't want to overheat the pan. First, what we'll do is we'll take an onion and we'll finely slice it. For this recipe, you must finely slice it. Why? Because if you do not slice it properly, you won't get the perfect texture. So I'll just cut it over here, keep it like this, and I'll go as close as I can. This is done. Push it on the side. You just need one large onion. This is done. The pan has come to heat, so what I'll do is I'll add half a cup of clarified butter. This is more than half a cup, so I'll just keep some on the side and you will let it melt. So once you're used or once you're done with the clarified butter, just move this around and add the onions. The onions must not be added for this recipe on extreme high heat. You want it to go in the pan when the oil is fairly warm, you could say. This is done. On the other hand, the water over here has come to boil, so I'll shift it to the pilot and I'll just move this around. The heat must be high, remember that. Spread it out and add a little bit of salt so that the onions get a chance to sweat. So I'll add around just a pinch. I'll move it around, shake it up once, and let it rest properly. Give it a lid and let it cook for around 2 minutes on medium heat. This is done. Now what you need to do is you need to add the lentil. So I'll transfer all the mash dal, the mash lentil as we call it in Pakistan, which was soaked for at least an hour and washed at least 5 to 6 times. You must remember this, that the dal must be washed thoroughly. Why? Because you want all the dust particles to exit the dal before it goes to boil. Now increase the heat, and once it comes to heat or once it comes to boil, you will let the dal cook for at least 15 minutes on medium heat. Okay, so I'll give it a lid, and once the dal comes to boil, the lentil comes to boil, I'll take it off. Why? Because there's another reason, that if you do not take the lid off, the dal will always give this foam out or this froth out on the top, and for that you need to take the lid off, otherwise the lid will make it bubble even more and your stove will go a little dirty towards the end. Okay, so now looking at the onions are cooking smoothly. Now on this stage, what I'll do is I'll add some garlic. Okay, the garlic for this recipe must not be added in the paste form or the shredded form. The dal in this recipe must be added when it's sliced. So reduce the heat over here, keep it on low, and as you can see the froth is coming up. I'll take it off so that it goes down. Okay, now reduce the heat. Now what I'll do for you today is I'm going to take the froth out. Why? Because in the culinary world you usually refer to this froth as impurities. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll pick up a fresh bowl, it's over here, and I'll pick up a ladle. I'll just take this froth out. As you can see, it's like cream. I'll keep it over here so that you can take a look, and I'll let this boil for, let's say, around 15 minutes. Okay, so till time this is cooking, we'll go for a short break, and once we're back, I'll let you know what to do. Don't go anywhere, keep watching Indus Cuisine. Welcome back. You're watching Indus Cuisine and I'm your chef Basim. Akhund. During the break, I was just letting the dal the lentil boil, and I just gave it like 5 minutes, so I'll keep it on the stove for at least another 10 to 12 minutes. Now why is that? Because in between I reduced the heat so that I could take the froth off from the top, and that took a little bit of time. On the other hand, I've let the onions get a little light brown, and I'll just mix them now so that I bring the ones which are at the edge in the center. Okay, this is done. Always remember, the edges of the pan has more heat as compared to the center of the pan. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll just finely slice the garlic, as fine as you can go. You want it fine. Why? Because there's a reason behind it. Garlic is very powerful in terms of flavor. If the garlic will not be finely sliced, what will eventually happen is if you get a piece in your bite, it can overpower or overshadow all the other ingredients in the recipe. So you do use garlic, but the way of using garlic for this recipe is very different as compared to the other ones. Okay, now increase the heat. As you can see, half of the onion is brown and half of the onion is a little towards the translucent side. I'll just increase the heat now, and this will also eventually change its color. Okay, now just take a spatula and let it cook. As I've told you, the edges of the pan are always much more hotter than the center or the core of the pan. Why? Because the heat towards the end is directly touching the metal, and that gives it a more chance of getting hot, or the onions get more brown. So what do you do when the onions are getting brown towards the edges and they're not brown towards the center? You push the brown part in between and you push the white part on the side, and eventually you will get this texture. Okay, now I'll reduce the heat. Why? Because this will quickly, very quickly change its color. So now what do you need? You need some tomatoes. I'll take around 2 tomatoes. Now I'll just put the garlic on pilot because I don't want it to burn. Always remember, your knife needs to be really sharp whenever you're cutting tomatoes. Take the eye of the tomato off and keep it on the side. Cut it from in between, and now finely chop them. They will eventually break down and the texture will change. They're smaller as compared to the large ones, so I'm using 2. If you find the large tomatoes, try using a tomato and a half. Why? Because you do not want too much of tomato flavor in your recipe. This is done. Now the onions are completely brown. We'll add some room temperature tomatoes to bring the heat down. And now increase the heat. We add some water, around a 1/4 cup. That's it. Mix it around. Flatten it out. And give it a lid so that the tomatoes get fair heat and they start getting soft and they start breaking down. We take the other tomato and we throw it on the side. Okay, now you need the green chilies. You need around 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 chilies for now. Why? Because chilies vary in size. If you get an equal size of the chili, you can use 6 to 7. If you don't get the equal size, some are bigger, some are small, just take down 2. So I'm taking the end part of the chili out in front of you, and it's my job to teach you step by step. Why? Because some people might be watching Indus Cuisine for the first time or the 5th time, and some people might be following all the episodes. So you need to take it as the episode is being watched by the other people, maybe for the first time. Okay, so just slowly go in. So now you have to add the green chilies, and as you can see, the tomatoes are soft, but before that you must mash the tomatoes. So slowly and gradually take the part of the spatula which curves towards the inner side and just start mashing it. Increase the heat a little bit. Why? Because when the tomatoes are on high heat, then only you'll get the perfect texture, the perfect mash. Why? Because tomatoes are like fat. They get cold, they get stiff. They stay hot, they start melting. Okay, this is done. Now, as you can see, the oil is out. We want the oil to come back out. Why? Because we want to fry the ingredients for this recipe. You must remember that. Add the green chilies. Add a pinch of salt. Mix it again so that the green chilies hit the oil and they get a chance for frying it thoroughly. This is done. Now, as you can see, the dal, the lentil, is cooked properly. So what we'll do is now we'll drain the water out and I'll show you. Let me just show you first how to realize that the lentil is cooked properly. I'll add it on the board if you can see it, and I'm just going to pick up my paring knife and I'm going to press it. If it mashes like this, then the dal is ready, then the mashed dal is ready, then the dal we're cooking today only is ready. Why? Because there are different types of lentils, and for this one you need to mash it and you have to see it. So I'm going to drain this out and then I'm going to come back and show you what to do next. So as you can see, now the lentil is ready. It's over here. Nicely cooked, soft. Keep it over here. And now continue with the recipe. We'll take around 6 to 7 minutes and we'll be done with this recipe. So the episode is for 25 minutes. And each recipe that we cook which doesn't have beef cooks in 25 minutes, which is very quick for Pakistani food, because Pakistani food usually takes around an hour and a half. And if we cook beef, it usually takes 40 minutes. Why? Because we give the 20 minutes for the pressure cooker part. So remember, if you're cooking and if you're following our recipes on Indus Cuisine, you will be cooking very quickly. Okay, this is done. Always make sure that your blade is sliding towards the right or left and your knife is not straight. Why? Because you can hurt yourself. Okay, so now we go in with the ginger. So we want the ginger to be flat, so I'll just take this part out and I'll keep it over here on the board. Go really close with it. Why? Because you want this to be really fine. And now we shall finally slice it. So what I'll do is I'll keep some pieces of the ginger on each other equally the way they were cut. Why? Because we're going to save time like this, and then we shall slice it. The end part usually goes on the side. And this is done. Just pass your knife a little more to get some uneven cuts. Why? Because this recipe is done this way. And now what I'll do is I'll put half of it in the pan right now and I'll reserve half of it on the side of the board. It goes over here. Increase the heat to medium now. Why? Because it's time to start cooking. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll pick up a little bit of butter. I'll pick up my paring knife. I'll just take this much. I'll put it on the side and the remaining will be used later. Why? We want the flavor of the butter to be mixed with the masala. Okay, so push it on the side and let it melt over here. Spread it out. It's all about the process, remember it. Okay, so we'll add the cumin. We'll add the red chilies, dried. We'll add the black peppercorn and we'll add the cumin powder. All of it goes on one side and we'll tilt it so that we can fry these ingredients in the butter and oil mixture. The oil is seeping from the tomatoes towards that side. Remember this, you must fry it. Why? Because you want that perfect flavor, you want that perfect harmony of flavors in your recipe. This is done. I can smell the ingredients. It just takes around a minute. That is it. If you're frying them so that they release their aroma, and now then again you mix it again. Fold it in. And now we shall add the lentil. The lentil goes in now. Pick up a spatula, a rubber one preferably, and try not wasting the lentil. You never know how many people do not eat before they sleep at night. So we might as well respect the ingredients we're getting, and we might as well use them in an efficient way. Remember that. There are a lot of kids in the world that do not get a meal a day. Increase the heat and mix it up. Now I'm mixing it up right now like this. Why? It's not frying. The reason behind it is that the lentil has some moisture because it was boiled. So I want the moisture to evaporate first. Once the moisture evaporates, then I'll add some butter. So just mix it up like this. We add some salt, around a 1/4 teaspoon. Why? Because I hadn't added the salt in the beginning. It was just a pinch or two when we were adding the onions, the tomatoes. Remember that. So salt to taste. And as you can see now, the moisture is done. Shift it over here. Pick a smaller pan. Keep it here. Keep the lids over here. And now we go in with the butter. Everyone knows butter is beautiful. Butter tastes really nice. And it's one of the favorite things that the human beings love. This is done. And now just spread it around so that it melts. And frying doesn't mean deep frying. Please remember that. Frying means just to add enough so that the grain of the lentil is coated evenly. Make this piping hot. Get around, let's say, a tablespoon of clarified butter. Mix it up. And as you can see, it's cooked. The butter is hot. Reduce the heat. Why? Because butter burns. Add the remaining ginger, add the garam masala, and spice things up. Flavor the butter. Remember it, we're flavoring it right now. This is done. Now, transfer all of this into the pan. As I said, try not wasting anything. And increase the heat to full. And let it partially fry. So as you can see, the butter is everywhere. And now I shall scoop it. Just start mixing it. And today's recipe is ready. Now I'm going to dish this recipe out and show you the final look. So now you have to finely chop some coriander, not too much. Let's just say around a tablespoon of coriander. Turn it around, keep chopping. Fold it. And now just sprinkle it on top just a bit. Take a piece of lemon. Shift everything on the side. The board only has coriander, so don't worry. Squeeze one on top. And this is how it's done. I hope you liked today's episode. I'll see you in another episode of Indus Cuisine. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.